Hello and welcome back to San Juan County Council's Tuesday, July 7th regular scheduled meeting. Is now just at 10:45, and we will begin our next discussion, which is a transportation improvement plan priority array with, let's see, engineering, docket, and maintenance plan with First Touch Colin Huntemer. Mr. Stevens, are you there? And Mr. Watson, you're both there, correct? All right. Great, thank you. Colin?
Well, hello again, Council. I am intending to share my screen again. If you could confirm you could see it.
It is there.
Great. So, purpose of today's briefing is on this. We'll focus on the 6-year transportation improvement plan for the county. Just want to do 3 things today: is to go over the adoption schedule for this year, including the numerous times that this will be before council and the planning commission. We will go over the TIP that was adopted last year and brief council on how we're doing on the programs and projects on it, and then get some direction on the TIP for next year. At the conclusion of today's meeting, I will take the feedback, and then Christine and I will, primarily Christine, will develop your binders that you have become accustomed to over the last few years, so that you will have all that material combined for you in person ahead of the next briefing, and I will transition right now into the adoption calendar for this year. So today, just focusing on the TIP. Today's July 7th. And after today's meeting, I intend to bring this to the Planning Commission, who will receive a similar presentation on August 21st. Sometime between now and the Planning Commission meeting, you will be handed your binders, and in your binders will be everything that you're accustomed to, including the TIP, the 6-year transportation improvement program, the annual construction plan, the priority array, a couple of the marine and bridge reports. We also have our annual complete street report, and those will be kept current, and you'll see those in more detail on August 25th. For a second touch, a third touch in September, and then the Planning Commission will hold their public hearing, and then a public hearing for council in October 13th, and depending on council's direction, that public hearing, of course, can be continued all the way up until budget adoption. Are there any concerns or comments on the calendar before you?
Stevens?
I don't have any.
Mr. Watson?
No comments from Watson.
I'm fine, Colin. Please continue.
Great. So moving on. What you have up here is Resolution 36/2019. That was last year's TIP, and I'm just going to go through these one by one for council's benefit, and then we'll conclude with a draft version of next year's. So, as discussed earlier this morning, Connector Road is open. Excuse me. There's some minor work remaining on that project. We have some fencing bordering the Island Rec property. That'll be consistent with the other fences you see out there. We also have some fences on some of the adjoining private properties that the county has committed to installing back when we negotiated and received right-of-way donations. There is some ongoing discussions with the town and port regarding truck traffic and future projects on the port property. but those will continue even after this project is dropped from the tip. And if a project materializes from those discussions or a conceptual project, council will be engaged, and that project will be scoped and budgeted, and then council will have to include it on future programs. I do have some pictures. I think I shared those with you already this morning from the road opening on that project. So that number one, Pearpoint to Turnpoint connector will be dropped, obviously, for next year's plan. At any time as I'm moving through these, feel free to interject with questions. The second one, Upper Deer Harbor Road improvements. We have secured. Yes?
Sorry, do we have copies of any of this?
No. After today's meeting, you will get your binders.
You said that again. Sorry, I just was trying to clarify. Thank you.
Yes. No,
No, just keep
I
going.
would have liked to have had some of this ahead of the today's meeting, but scheduling demands proved challenging. Okay.
Keep going.
So Upper Deer Harbor Road improvements, we have secured funding from a number of sources, and assuming that, presuming that council will continue the PFAP and LTAC allocations and REIT allocations, that project will remain on hold while staffing completes a number of other projects. So that work on Upper Deer Harbor Road will get pushed to 2021 or 2022, depending on staffing resources.
Colin, where are we on the right-of-way with that?
The right-of-way claims by the county have been contested by adjoining property owners. I am waiting we have staffing resources, and then I'll work with John Kane on filing the county's response to their initial petition. So it's on hold. There's no action has been filed by either party for well over a year now. And there's no sense of urgency to take the matters to the next step until the county can really work on the project in an engineering sense. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just, even if we had staff, we wouldn't be able to move forward on it until we get that part figured out.
Correct. So when staff is available to work on that project, they will pursue both of them simultaneously. Aggie Beach County Park, Mr. Stevens, Councilmember Stevens is intimately involved on that one. We have some conceptual designs and that were presented to some stakeholders that has been pushed back out to Western Federal Lands and Bureau of Land Management. We have a right-of-way survey completed. We have some environmental reports, including wetlands and cultural resources. I'm hoping to get a 30% design from federal lands in July this month. And if council is interested, that can be either formally briefed or we can share it individually. Once the scope of that 30% design is presented, we will do a reassessment of the funding that we have secured to make sure that we are on track. Prune Alley Road improvements. We shared a 60% design with EPRC and the public. There's been some recent discussions regarding lighting on Prune Alley that have stirred some interest from the community, but we are engaging on that front and working towards 100% design by the end of this year, which will allow us to start construction next year. Beaverton Alley Road culvert. I have no work on that project. I recommend that it can be pushed out and we monitor the site, and if site conditions that warrant otherwise, we will accelerate it, but There are other priorities that have been more important. Douglas Baylor Road. That is the recipient of CRAB Road Arterial Program Grant, similar to what was received for Orcas Road. We have $1.2 million that we got in this biennium, and we're expecting to receive full funding for a total of $2.6 million in the next biennium. That project requires that we engineer and design it in-house to make it financially viable. It was also developed with the concept of a separated trail. Just a moment. So as a visual, this is Douglas Road as it turns into Baylor Road looking west up Baylor Hill. And council, a number of years ago, when we submitted the grant, we had envisioned improving the road and also improving a 10-foot multimodal trail adjacent to the road. The current funding climate right now for county roads and the stresses we have on fuel taxes and Cape Ron and others, I do not have a plan or funding secured for this element of the project. As it stands right now, the CRAB grant we have received will fund and construct the road portion, which is 11-foot lanes and 4-foot shoulders. So that is secured. And unless funding materializes for this element, it will probably be dropped from the project. So in essence, this road is proposed to look much similar to how Fisherman Bay Road was rebuilt on Lopez and Orcas Road was recently rebuilt on Orcas. The separated trail, even if it's not a component because of funding concerns of this project, it can always be included in the future if the county finds ways to fund that construction.
So, Colin, will that money carry over into the next biennium?
Yes. Let me see. This money will carry forward.
Okay.
A Street Road improvements. That was put on the tip a number of years ago. We haven't secured any funding for it. I don't have a project schedule, and as of last year, it's not even showing any work on the next 6 years. Our staffing, I guess, as a theme for developing this tip, I think it's very important that we accurately represent a program that we can afford and that we can staff. And I am recommending that this project be moved off the tip and put back on the priority array until funding is identified, a schedule or a scope of the project shows it up here in the ensuing 6 years. Right now it's just hanging out there, and I think it's better placed on the priority array. Haven Road pedestrian improvements. That project was complete, and COVID, again, slows us seeing some of these projects, and I would like to share with council a few pictures so you can see what it looks like, what we've recently completed. So it's an extension of the curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Let me take you back a number of years. 4 or 5 years ago, council adopted road improvement standards for Haven and Madrona Point. And those were developed because of a residential project. I've zoomed in here on the photo, but these houses were built a number of years ago, and the developer built frontage improvement based off the council adopted road standards. And then subsequent of this, Public Works recommended that we connect this sidewalk with the sidewalk on Main Street. So the county project was from here, where my cursor is, west to the intersection. And these are photos from a few weeks ago of the recently completed project. There are some elements that we are working with the community on, including landscaping or benches of this area, and then also some tree plantings along the sidewalk in here. But we will certainly complete those accoutrements this year, which will allow us to drop this program from the tip. So that's Haven. We can drop that one. So the next project, Rulo Road, also similar to A Street. It lacks funding, it lacks a schedule, and it's better placed on the priority array until scoping or some of these other elements can be defined. San Juan Valley Road improvements. After Prune Alley, it is possible that we could fund this project with our STPG, STP funds. Those are federal funds. And I anticipate having staff available to work on this after Upper Deer Harbor. Center Road could possibly follow Douglas Baylor as a crab wrap project. So we have no work on that, but it's in the later years on the tip. And then these next three also have been hanging out there on the tip without any resources, schedule, or funding identified. They remain good projects. I highly recommend that we include those on our priority array, which is our big list of good ideas and good projects that we receive from the community, the council, and this department. But I don't recommend they are populated on the tip at this time. Orcas Landing Marine Facility. We completed a number of phases down there with the wall. And then we focused this year on some site amenities, opening it up to the public. But I recommend we accelerate this project with a focus on the infrastructure, curbs, gutters, sidewalks. Bring up another photo here. This is the end of the sidewalk now near the intersection, and so the emergent need certainly is to continue this sidewalk up into the county's own parking area up the hill, so that we can remove these temporary concrete jersey barriers and this chain link fence, which are necessary until a curb gutter sidewalk is constructed. So recommendation to accelerate this project back up on the tip with some design this year and possible construction next year in a future phase. There are also elements of the Orcas Landing facility that require our attention. This is a few pictures of the marine portion and the piles. You can see that there's some serious decay, and we will be monitoring these to see if we need to accelerate the replacement of these creosote piles too. Moving on, Hunter Bay Also recommending that we accelerate this project schedule. This is the float, Mr. Stevens probably remembers, that broke apart during the winter storm recently. It has some temporary repairs. Here in the midsection, this discoloration. But that's a good picture of it. A highly used marine facility, and one that I think is worthy of acceleration on the tip because of its use and condition. I think this facility would benefit from something similar to what we did at Audland, opening up the float to both sides for moorage and replacing the Capriso piles with steel piles. It's Hunter Bay. West Sound, another marine facility that can remain on the tip because of its conditions and needs. We have no work on it yet, but it's shown here in 2022. Annual gravel road conversions. We recently completed Three Corner Lake Road on San Juan Island. I think it turned out very nicely, and if council has a moment, you could drive out there to take a look at it. We have some smaller roads on Lopez that we're hoping to do this year, portions of Lopez Sound, Caulfield Drive, and Paradise Road. But gravel road conversions are always open for suggestions from council or the public. And I can receive those now or anytime. Lopez Road Trail, we took a look at that. It's shown here without any work in the next 6 years, but evaluation of that project, and in light of what we're doing right now on Fisherman Bay Road, I think that we can do this quicker and easier with county crews as roadside maintenance. So I'm going to regroup with the superintendent on Lopez and talk about that project and see if we can just get it done outside of the tip. Enchanted Forest Road Trail. This was an EPRC requested and PFAP funded project. They have settled on curb, gutter, and sidewalk, surprisingly, on Enchanted Forest Road. We have a preliminary design, but the challenges remain given the proximity to the East Sound Swale, which is a special overlay district in East Sound, requiring additional environmental permits. So we are working actively through DCD on obtaining those. May or may not get to construction this year, depending on when we can obtain the permits, but it might be a shoulder year project. Lovers Lane, Crescent Beach Road, remain on the tip. Certainly have identified the pedestrian needs for those two projects, but we will, when staffing resources materialize in the next few years, we will work on identifying scope and securing funding for those. Pearpoint shoulder widening. We had some delays because of staffing and COVID. Some staff that was out. We do need right-of-way on that, and it's another project that may or may not be completed this year, depending on how quickly right-of-way can be secured and permits can be obtained. At the road opening for Connector Road, the town, the mayor and a town council member who were there also expressed strong support for this project, including possibly an extension from the fairgrounds down to Pearpoint Road on Argyle. Fisherman Bay shoulder widening. We have been successful in pursuing that in phased construction. Shannon has completed a first phase of that, kind of adjacent from the county road shop, and we will work on continuing that this year and possibly into next year, ultimately paving that shoulder. There is some right-of-way that is required for that, and Shannon will be in front of you next week with a resolution proposing that council delegate the authority to Mike Thomas to acquire the right-of-way for that project. Some of it would be temporary and some of it will be permanent.
So, Colin, this is Jamie. On that, I mean, right now there's only like 2 houses worth of pathway put in.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you got any, I heard absolutely no complaints, but I noticed that particularly on now that the marinas are doing more business, that where it is, it's done great and gets a lot of use. It's I'm just wondering why we didn't do more where we do have the right of way.
Right now, we're prepping for chip seal on Orcas, and then we're going to do some chip seal on Lopez, which requires all hands on deck. And as soon as that effort is concluded and resources free up, absolutely, we will continue with more phases. I also have heard no complaints, and I think the project has strong support. So we will continue to work on it.
It looks great.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. We will continue to work on that as soon as chip seal, the collective chip seal effort concludes on Orcas and Lopez. There are some elements closer to the marina, Mr. Stevens, that will require some right of way, but I think it's worthy of picking this project up off in pieces because even the short segments, like you mentioned, are getting use. Orcas Road Multimodal is a complete streets funding. These last 3 here are all complete streets projects, and there certainly is a priority to complete these 3 projects, which would be the 4 total that we secured funding for. And once all 4 of these are complete, we can go around and apply for additional complete streets funding for these types of projects. The Orcas Road Multimodal one is on Lovers Lane as you enter down into East Sound on Main Street. Marine navigation and moorage, we had our first expenditure out of that sub-account in the road fund with completion of a mooring buoy field study by a consultant. And that is available for council, and I guess I would include that study in your binder so that you can review it at your leisure. But it was done a couple months ago, and once council has reviewed that study and would like to provide further direction on implementing any recommendations of that, we are ready to hear those.
Colin, is it possible for you to let's get that on the agenda coming up. When it first came out, we were in the middle of the OPMA requirement with nothing but, usual and customary topics to discuss. So if we could get you or Mike in front of council sometime in the next 2 weeks, that would be great to go over that plan.
Okay, I would recommend, unless you want to accelerate it, that I would include it in this date, the 25th of August, when we go over the other reports.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Miscellaneous unspecified projects. This allows us to be flexible and respond to emergent projects. We have done a little bit of work this year regarding a sidewalk, possible sidewalk as you enter into the fairgrounds. COVID has kind of reshaped the urgency on that project, but we are still making small efforts towards it. And again, that remains open for council to make requests for small capital projects as they appear. So you take everything here in front of you, you put it together, and then this is what next year's TIP, the 2021 TIP, would look like. The only addition to the tip. So we're, excuse me, with the green acceleration arrows, some of the blues pushing projects out, and the removal of projects which back onto the priority array, and the sole addition of another trail project, this time coming from the Deer Harbor Planning Review Committee. They were the recipient of a $70,000 LTAC grant for a future extension of the trail we built for them a few years ago, Public Works built for them. That would be the only addition to next year's TIP. And I think it's very important that we develop a TIP, especially right now with the pressures we have on our funding sources, that we put forward a TIP that accurately reflects the program that we can afford and work on. That way we can be accountable to council and both the public. And I think that these 20 projects here is certainly saturates the 3 project managers we have working on capital projects for the next 6 years. So all of this information will be compiled for council into your binders, and we'll have that delivered to you. And then on the 25th, after you've had a couple weeks to digest that, we'll have an in-depth presentation with me and also Christine to cover some of these other elements that she manages. And we'll continue these through 3-4 more touches at least until it gets adopted later this year. Are there any questions?
I don't have any more.
So this is Watson. If I understand right now, the potential design work in partnership with the Port of Friday Harbor is not on the list, correct?
It's not on the tip because I don't have a capital project. So I am, and I need to regroup with Mr. Thomas here, possibly this week, but we are certainly collaborating with them in a planning sense, in an engineering sense, but until a project is developed and something that I can propose or bring forward to the council, it doesn't belong on the tip.
Okay.
And to that, there are numerous other projects that we're working on. Certainly, I mean, we're working on a guardrail repair project. There's tons of other projects going on there that is on our so-called engineering docket, and that list I will share with council briefly on the 25th. But this is primarily our capital program, our larger stuff, and the collaboration with the port wouldn't be on this list until a project is defined.
Hey, Colin, this is Mike. The complete street projects.
Yes.
I may have spaced out through your presentation, but probably not. So quickly, what is the PowerPoint project? What's the status on that?
The staff member we had working on that was out. They are back for a few months, 3 months now. So they are back in the last week or two. And it's possible that we could break ground on that this year, depending on how successful we are with right-of-way and permitting. If not, it might carry forward into the next year. But that is, it's shown here on the 2021 tip, and also with construction in 2021, but it is possible that we could do it this year, depending on how successful we are.
Okay, thank you.
This project here. So we have it shown in 2022. It's just one of those shoulder year projects.
All right.
Any other questions, Mr. Thomas? Mr. Watson, any questions?
Nope, I'm done.
Ms. Stevens?
Nope, thanks.
All right, I appreciate your time, council, and again, look forward to you receiving your binders with all your material ahead of the next in-depth briefing in August.
Great, thank you, Colin, very much. Appreciate the time. Sad to see so many red marks, but hopefully we can move forward and try to find some funding to finish the projects that we've got on the tip. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and just to be clarity, those projects don't disappear. They just get moved off of this list and they go on a holding list on the priority rate. But you'll see that on the 25th.
But Colin, I like them all on the 6-year plan.
Thank you, council.
12 years and 6.
All right, so council, just a real quick agenda shift here. We're going to go into an action item, care spending, and council, this is about, I asked Tara to come and let's go update on what we have or haven't spent or at least accrued for the CARES. I'd like to get some final direction on how to allocate that spending. And after that, we have a closed session. Mike, is there any kind of action will be taken?
No.
Okay, so if it's all right with council, I'd like to shift the closed session to after council member updates, and I see we have an appointment for planning commission, and then we can have the closed session and then adjourn. Is that all right with council?
Fine with me.
All right, great. So with Mike, do you want to kick off the care spending discussion, and then we'll ask the auditor's office for some input?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Hughes. So there was a briefing provided to council on the CARES funding provided to the county. So Tara did a great job of pulling together information showing expenditures to date. On top of that, we had a request out to the departments, and the departments provided their list of requests for eligible CARES funding, and that was provided to council. Also part of the conversation was a request of Mark Tompkins to discuss with the resource centers, I think specifically on what their current or projected needs are. And so that was, I think Mark sent out an email yesterday with a table in that. So I think in the CARES funding discussion, we're trying to do a couple of things. We're trying to figure out what can CARES provide funding for the county's COVID-19 response, what it can provide for departmental requests as they change their business to deal with COVID. Then also the last part of the conversation was an external piece. And I think the council a couple of weeks ago earmarked or highlighted $157,000 for community expenditures, and that dovetails into the exercise to ascertain need. So maybe a good place to start is to have Tara go through the worksheet that was provided to you a couple of weeks ago, and I think she has updated some of those numbers. So maybe that's the base that we start the discussion on.
This is Tara. Hi, San Juan County Auditor's Office, Senior Budget Analyst and Chief of the Finance and Admin section of our EOC. We haven't provided a new monthly update. We are waiting for the last of those costs to come in. Probably the most significant change that we've seen since I presented on our worksheet was that we did get verification from the U.S. Treasury that CARES funding can be used as a match against our FEMA reimbursements. So there was an amount of $89,000 that we thought that we were going to need to spend from the general fund, which it's really moving money around. We certainly have greater need than the CARES funding has provided for us. But if you apply that $89,000 to the CARES funding as an allowable area of reimbursement, and that would apply for things like testing, surge, PPE, those types of things. That 89,000 then would exceed what is available for CARES, even before we dip too much into any department requests. So as we know, the CARES funding is 943,000 round numbers. And given our current projections, once you add that FEMA in, we've expended that full thing plus another $16,000. So that, of course, includes us maintaining capacity for surge and continuing with our testing that Mark has put those budget numbers forward. So I can take questions about that, but other than that, there hasn't been any significant changes since my last presentation.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, Tara, is that the presentation from June 6th?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I have the right sheet. And,
yeah, in there was, you know, 157,000 for economic support to the community. The department requests, those have shifted a little bit, so they're at about 292,000. And then there is the surge and quarantine is included in there, and that's about 373,000. So if we somehow are lucky enough to avoid that, there's 373,000 that, you know, we would avoid in expenses there if we're able to avoid a surge in quarantine. But given the state of the union right now, I think we want to be conservative and maintain that at least.
So using that 89,000, you're saying we're exceeding the total of 980 whatever. So does that include the 157,000 for economic support, or
it does?
Or is that out of it now?
That does include the 157 in economic support.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Watson? No questions at this time. You're muted. You're good, right?
Sorry. Yeah, no questions this time.
All right, thank you. So one quick question from me. The surge and quarantine money, is that not potentially covered by the 312, which is about 300,000 now that we was given from Commerce for the preventing homelessness?
A portion of that is covered by there. So if you still, I see you have your worksheet available. So if you look at that second tab, it's lines 22 and 23 on the second tab. You can see that there is, for portions of that, the Department of Commerce funding first, then we would lean on FEMA, and then we would need to lean on current expense. Again, since we know now that CARES can be a match to FEMA, that removes the current expense portion and then plugs FEMA in there instead as a third funding source there.
What's the name of this spreadsheet? I may be looking at a different one.
It should be called financial report with the followed by the date, which was
I've got COVID-19 financial report 6/9/2020.
Yep.
I don't see the tab that you're talking about.
Cost by activity summary.
Yeah, we're looking at it. It's up on the shared screen there. Lines 22 and 23 talk about quarantine and isolation housing. So that would cover those costs associated with the quarantine and isolation housing.
Got it. Thank you. No, I was at the wrong summary.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, so what, do we have money for the department requests?
I would say that the expenses exceed what we have in CARES funding. We have $2 million worth of overall expenses projected through the end of this year, and we have $943 in CARES funding. So the needs exceed our available funding on all fronts.
So, Tara, to clarify that, we did put in that on your sheet, it has 89,200 for future department response expenses, but you said it was around 200. The actual requests were around 273. Is that close?
The department request, I amended, I did take a look at that. I wasn't able to get that out to you guys, but there's been some minor adjustments in the technology upgrade costs for the Superior Court, the District Court, and what they're looking at for the hearing room. So the new number there on what we believe would need to lean on either CARES or current expense, depending on how the expenses lie, is $292,000.
Okay.
And how much is the FEMA reimbursement estimated?
We are hoping to see $268,000 reimbursed from FEMA.
So is this fair to say? So I have, in my numbers, I have about $1,523,000 of federal assistance, federal and state. So that would be the 942 plus the 312 plus the 250, 268. Is that fair?
Yeah, if you include I missed that number at the beginning, but I think what you were saying is the FEMA money, the CARES Relief Fund for local governments, and then the Department of Health funding together, that's $1.36 million. So 1.361 and change.
So I guess I'm confused. So in my simple math, of course,
I'm looking at on your worksheet there, column D, you have lines 19, 20, and then line 23. So the CARES, the FEMA, and then what's coded in our system as PEPFAR, which is the Department of Health Disaster Response Funds. Those combined are the bulk of funding that is being used for the response effort. And that's 1.36. Round numbers.
But that doesn't include the 943, right?
That does include the 943. So I'm looking at the FEMA of 268, the CARES of 293, and then the Department of Health Disaster Response funding. Those three items are the bulk of what we are utilizing for the response efforts right now. There is also the emergency housing grant funding, which is really being utilized for isolation and quarantine and surge if there's, if we escalate. So I'm not considering that right now for the bulk of the response work.
No, I get that, but you've got the 373.34 in the surge and quarantine, and so that pretty much negates that, correct?
Yeah, it offsets a big chunk of it, which is really a relief, isn't it? Feels good.
Right. I'm just trying to get down to so at some point we need to allocate how we spend the money. This is what our costs are, but we need to make a decision on how we would like to spend each of these funds within the scope of it. And that's what I'd like to get through today, or at least talk about it more to get to a final decision soon. And I'd also like to, Mark, are you on the phone?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what you're saying there. Really what we have to make a decision on is the 157,000, because everything else it's already either been spent or is allocated to be spent on our response, unless you're planning on coming up with that money from somewhere else.
There's $339,299 in department requests. So I'm trying to figure out, is that included in this budget or not? And are we interested in supporting the department requests?
And I've heard it was not included.
That's what I understood.
And so I'm just trying to get to the fact, are we planning on honoring the department requests or not? So the answer is no. So the court costs, we're not honoring that request.
Chair, if I may, the department requests are considered in this summary. They essentially are, what's left, if anything, of the CARES funding, and then current expense. There's no other grants that would pay for those department requests. So they're included there in the total. There's a portion of the department requests which were a part of the public health response for testing that we're going to be seeking FEMA funding for. So that's included under the FEMA. But there's 292 of it that is leaning on CARES and current expense to continue for those to move forward.
Okay, I'm going to ask a process question, and maybe I'm just not understanding this, but do we not need to itemize how we're going to spend the CARES funding per allocation, even though it's here, but do we not need to make a budget authorization because it's incremental money that would say in this spreadsheet we're agreeing with how the $943,000 is getting spent, or the FEMA, or that's what I'm trying to get to, is that Mike and I talked earlier this week that we need to finalize the CARES spending, and it's more than just the $157,000 unless I'm mistaken. I'm not trying to create anything new. I'm just trying to do our process to agree from council on are we supporting this or not. Mike?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. So I guess first and foremost, of the money that we've received, and focusing on the three funding sources that Tara identified, is what have we consumed to date just for the COVID-19 response, and what do we anticipate spending towards the end of the year? So what is that number? And based on that, is there anything left over to entertain the department requests? You've already segged out the 157, so you need to make a decision on how that's going to be spent. So Tara, if I'm reading this right, there really isn't, because of the COVID-19 response, there really isn't anything left over per se for the department requests. Is that correct?
Yeah, I know it's a complicated kind of situation with all the different grants and the different criteria across all of them, and then how do we as an entity prioritize how we spend our money and what we're going to spend it on, our limited funds that we have. So yes, if you add the department requests in, if there is ongoing surge activity, if FEMA denies some of our requests and we need to go to second tiers of funding, it would be easy for us to spend all of our CARES funding and more, and significantly more. The thing that I think of as a grants manager, is when we're seeking the CARES funding and we're putting in for our reimbursements, if we decide we need to invest in these things for Superior Court, I'm just using this as an example. Looking at the department requests, if we say, this is what we need as an entity to be able to move forward in this brave new world that we all live in, and that's a determination that council makes, I, as a grants administrator, would move forward with applying for those reimbursements before I would seek reimbursement for staff time, because they're easily justifiable. It'll be faster releases of cash, and just from a flow and administration standpoint, those types of expenditures will be easier to quickly get reimbursement for. Once we certainly have plenty of staff time expenditures for people that have been working outside of their normal work, that we're budgeted to do other things that we're going to seek reimbursement for now. If we seek all of that for reimbursement, the administrative burden and the paperwork is significantly heavier. So just administratively, depending on where you decide to prioritize, that will cause me to shift where we want to look at using current expense versus CARES funding. From a standpoint also as an administrator, being able to submit work that's allowable under the tasks of the CARES contract, I do not need any further. I of course always want to know everything that you guys think and work in alignment with that. But from a legal standpoint, you've already approved our work on the CARES contract, and that signature has happened and is already moving forward. So we can start seeking reimbursement now without any further action. But we're kind of holding off, waiting to see what your priorities are, and we also need the ink signatures back. So.
All right, so just to make sure that I understand this correctly, all that we need in this process at this point is to finalize how the $157,000 is allocated, and over time we'll relook at some of these department requests in comparison to how, existing salary-based wages. Is that correct? I guess I'm trying to understand what we need to do to move this process forward so we can focus on something else on budget.
Mr. Chair, this is the auditor.
Yes, Marlene.
I have a question for Tara about when I look at your chart here, where you show 1.5 million, I think, I'm not sure what I'm looking at, but clearly our expenditures, our possible expenditures that might be reimbursed exceed our sources of funding. But those expenditures, as I believe you just said, include some staff time, which is already budgeted. So it's
Correct.
not, okay, an excessive meaning over budget expenditure. In addition, I see that you've budgeted $373,000 for surge and quarantine, which is basically a contingency. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So if we're lucky and we don't get a big surge, and if we accept that we're not going to be able to reimburse all of our staff time, which was already budgeted anyway, we would like to get reimbursed for all the new staff, such as temporary nurses that we've had to hire. It looks to me like it is possible to be reimbursed for the department requests. And I think that I think your goal today, Mr. Chair, was to, I know the goal of the people, some of the department heads listening, is for you to approve the expenditures in the department request list. And personally, based on the fact that the surge amount is recommended and accepting that we're probably not going to be reimbursed for all staff time, I believe there is adequate funding, and most of those expenditures are what I would call essential. So if there's something you need to do today, I think it's to approve the expenditures on the department request so that we can move forward with those and get them done before the end of October.
Great. And so the issue at hand is really the $424,000 in current expense, which is pretty close to what the salaries are, correct?
Correct. In fact, the salaries exceed the current expense. Exceed that. They're closer to 460 some, so a little bit over.
Got it. Okay.
So can I ask a question that
Yes,
goes
Jamie.
along with that? But on the report, and it says actual as of 6/1, it looks like we've already spent 618,000 out of the 983.
Yep.
Now, a portion of that is FEMA, and a portion of that is Department of Health Disaster Response, and a portion of that is some small level administration for emergency housing. So there are certainly expenses there that are not leaning on the CARES grant.
So this is Councilmember Watson. I admit I'm probably more confused than anybody else right now. I believe, Tara, that you are proposing that certain expenses be reimbursed by FEMA. I haven't seen that list. We've talked about budgeted staff time, i.e., if staff that worked on COVID was previously budgeted in current expense, then then we don't really need to reimburse for that because that was budgeted expense as compared to staff time that was not budgeted in current expense, such as the temporary nurses that we hired in addition, uh, uh, would need to be reimbursed because that wasn't in the original budget. So I think what council struggles with, or at least, I'm sorry, I know what I'm struggling with is trying to make sure that we get reimbursed for the unbudgeted expenses, right, as much as possible before we go into discussions around the departmental requests, which are again unbudgeted and above and beyond whatever anybody expected for this calendar year. So, I mean, you've got lots of information here. I know it's complicated, and maybe my request is unreasonable. I'll even accept that. But I struggle with trying to figure out whether I agree with your assumptions about what to reimburse by FEMA versus maybe some other choice that we want to choose to be reimbursed by FEMA. So I think that's maybe where the confusion's at.
Yeah, well, Bill, the worksheet that I sent has a tab with cost by activity summary, and in there it has that breakdown of what FEMA is willing to pay for. And the assumption, the based on best practices, is that we want to get submit for FEMA. Everything that we can submit for FEMA, we will submit for FEMA for, because we only get that money if we ask for it. And so, those expenses are happening anyway. These aren't elective expenses. These are things like PPE and EOC operations and the work of our public health official. So not really things that are very discretionary. Things that are critical to the response are those things that are covered by FEMA. And it is our intention to seek the maximum reimbursement that we can from them first for those critical expenses. And then what they can't pick up, then we look at others. Mm-hmm.
Before you go on, so have we submitted our request to FEMA?
We are still waiting for that contract to be completed, so we have not. And the CARES contract, we also are waiting on that to be returned to us as well. So we are doing everything we can actively to get that done, but there is administrative gridlock. Funny thing, when ink signatures are still required during pandemics, it slows things down. So I hope that helps to understand the thought process behind what the assumptions are on FEMA and where we would go there and how you can see where those costs might be incurred. Regarding the wages that are budgeted, I want to be careful about the way that we talk about this, because clearly anything that's budgeted is not eligible for CARES funding. So if I am budgeted to do payroll activities and I'm doing payroll activities for EOC staff, that doesn't count as something that the county can seek CARES money for. However, using the example that we used the last time when we talked together, if Christine Correa, an engineer in the Public Works Department, is pulled from her duties in Public Works to support the EOC response and is working outside of her normal duties, her salary was budgeted in roads. However, she is no longer doing that work. She's doing different work. Those are the wages that are depicted here.
Right.
Now, some of those, a significant share of those, are Fund 1 expenses, are for staff that are already current expense staff that are doing other response duties that are outside of their normal scope. There is no inclusion of wages of people that are working within their standard scope in this worksheet. However, there is about $460,000 worth of Fund 1 expenses for staff that are budgeted in that area that are working outside of their scope. And so when we talk about budgeted wages or not budgeted wages, that's really what we're talking about.
And so my input to you would be, and to my fellow council members, is that 461 current expense salaries do not need to be reimbursed because we budgeted them for current expense and we paid for them out of current expense. recognizing that they didn't do the tasks that we originally budgeted them to do, but we don't manage the budget at that level of detail when we approve somebody to be budgeted out of current expense. So, and I think that would be my main point of discussion with council, would be that might free up a bunch of money that then could be applied to departmental requests.
Absolutely. And the view that we're looking at here is strictly on from the scope of the grants and what's allowable for grants and how we might prioritize those things. It does not take into account a second level, which Mylene can speak to, which is how this has impacted the budget overall.
So, hey, Bill, I would agree, Bill, in theory, what you're saying. I guess my approach would be that those employee costs that we have accrued for EOC work would be the last thing that we consider to reimburse.
Right.
Can I have a comment here,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
I respectfully disagree with both of you. Just because we budgeted something, given the sales tax situation, doesn't mean the money's there. So if we take that approach, which I can understand, your thought process on it, but then that anything we do that way, then we've got to figure out where we're going to come up with it. Remember, we already had $1 million deficit in current expense. And so this, it'll all look fine as budgeted, but if we don't have the money to cover it, we need to keep that into consideration. If we're going to not cover any of those wages through these funding sources, then I'd like to hear some suggestions on how we are.
Right.
And just for both of you, Mr. Stevens, Mr. Watson, when you're looking at the department requests, I have spoken to Tony about the council department request for the council hearing room tech upgrade, and that's something we don't need to do at this point in time. So that would save this overall thing $80,000, if you guys support that.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I agree with Mylene. It's these kind of moving parts that all overlap. But I agree with Mylene that these department requests are reasonable and are necessary to prepare our offices with the way we've been basically directed by the state.
Well, right, but then Jamie, we get back into the same thing. The department requests are basically the difference or the delta to the EOC employment costs.
Just the E portion.
I told you it's a conundrum here.
Okay, well, I'm trying to see this on what we want to do, because there's requests for the department requests, and so the question is, are we agreeing to funding them? We can decide how we pay for all of this later, I guess, but do we want to, and the new number I have, so if you take out the 80,000 from the 339, do you guys agree with that part?
I'm sorry, I don't know where you are, so I don't know.
It's tab 3, department requests.
Rick, you can take out the 80,000 and substitute 4,000, which is for a camera that Tony said he needed to do it the new way. And the two courtrooms, one is now 98,000, and I believe the other is 90,000.
So the first item that says 80,000, you're saying is 98?
Yeah, one is 98 and one is 90. I don't remember which is which, but yes, those two 80,000s for the courts. And yes, I do think that it's important to approve these expenditures. I personally think that all of them are necessary to move forward in a COVID world. And some of them do have a lead time. Well, they all have some kind of a lead time.
Got it. So, Mylene, real quick, there's 100 cameras, webcam, under the IT budget that Tony has for 10,000. Are you saying that's now 4, or of the 80 becomes 4?
The 80 became 4. You made the correct change.
Okay. So then I look at a new number that's 291,299 is the department request. So, Mr. Stevens, back to your comment.
Why do we need 100 cameras?
Tony requested that because many of our county employees work at desktops that do not have built-in cameras. And he believes, and I agree with him, although I don't usually do it, that it is better to participate in online meetings if you have a camera.
So I'm sorry, let me clarify, they're webcams, so they're not like fixed cameras, they're cameras that you would attach to your.
Yes.
That is correct. That is what I have in my office when I am using my docking station rather than my laptop. But not all county employees have them.
So Mike and council, how would you like to move forward? Should we have a discussion about the department request and get that approved or not approved?
I think Mr. Stevens brought up a very fundamental question that I don't know if it's been resolved.
Well, I mean, but that was the whole point of the follow-up to bills, is that we would pay back the current expense EOC costs last. So that means this is a whole item of things that we've expended plus the department requests.
No,
So the only thing that we have, if we can't fund the EOC salaries, then we don't. And we have to fund it somewhere else if we want to do these department requests. So we have to make a decision one way or the other. That seems to be the only variable on this option, is the department requests. Is it not?
well, we have, I guess, I don't know, I didn't perceive consensus that we were going to not reimburse current expense staff because it's budgeted, but in the larger budget context, I mean, next week we start cutting the budget because revenues are falling, so it's.
Well, there's $424,000 set up in the current expense on this, according to this chart, to cover some of the costs. So if you had $424,000 to all of the grant funding, we're able to cover the $2,139,132. So that's the number that we're looking at of current expense funding. May it be somehow incremental or part of the 20 budget. Sorry, say budget, EOC expense on employees that had previously been budgeted for other tasks. That's what we're trying to get to though, right? I mean, so there's a shortfall in this discussion, and the only real variable cost are the $157,000 that we already agreed to spend in the community, and then the department requests.
Right, and the department requests are predicated on not seeking, in part, reimbursement for current expense staff.
Right, I mean, but some of this gets into the surge part, right? So if the surge funding line item, if we're fortunate enough, and I hope we are, that to not have to use that, then the hit in the current expense becomes less. That's why I said the last thing, following on Bill's comment, the last thing we would look to reimburse out of this would be the salary costs. Well, I mean, I'm kind of asking, like, isn't that what we need to decide today? Is the department requests or not?
Yes, the department requests, and then I'll call it the external 157.
I apologize, counsel, that I'm not asking your comments. Is this a path that you're willing to go through today, or do we need to take another week? Mr. Watson.
Yeah, so I think this is the decision we need to make today. There's no reason to kick the can down the road any further. And I think Tara needs the direction so she knows how to start to reply to these, reimbursement requests. I would deprioritize the reimbursement of current expense staff time, right, in favor of other things. Again, I'm not sure I'm totally bought into the whole set of departmental requests, but separate issue.
Bill, hold that thought for a second. So, Mr. Stevens, can you live with what Mr. Watson just brought out regarding the EOC budgeted employee time?
Yeah, but it's going to make next week's discussion a lot harder.
Yep.
Right, but we have to come to that agreement before we can talk about the department head requests. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, now, so for both of you, would you like to go through each department head request or department request and say yes or no? How would you like to move forward?
Going through them one at a time makes sense to me.
Mr. Stevens?
That's fine.
Okay, and so I'm now in the department head request tab on COVID-19 financial report 6/9/2020.
Okay.
Okay, and I modified the spending request per what Mylene just said.
So what were those alterations?
Okay, so we took away $80,000 on line 24, which was request 5 under council hearing room tech upgrade from $80,000 and moved it to $4,000. The second request was on line 12, which would be D12. There was an $80,000 amount for technology upgrade for Superior Court courtroom, and there's also a similar amount for the district court courtroom. Mylene wasn't sure which amount affected which court, so $98,000 for the Superior Court and $90,000 for the district court.
So
I have those numbers if it's helpful for you, Rick.
Oh, that'd be great. Which one's
So
which?
on line 12, 97,194, or you could put
Yes.
and then on line 13,
Yeah, I think I can deal with this later.
90,933.
90,333.
933. 90,933. You have it. There.
Good, thank you. I'm gonna put.
So just point out that Judge Lauren provided council and others with a memorandum on Friday that details the costs.
Okay. Okay, great. So those are the only changes. Is that correct, Mylene? Thank you for the exact amounts.
Those
So
are
now
the only ones I'm aware of.
So now we're at 291.
I actually, sorry, 292,299, and I just rounded up to 91,000 and 98,000. Is that all right?
Just keep me on the same page with you.
I'm trying. A lot of coffee for me today. Do we agree at 292, 299?
292. Okay.
Okay. So we'll start with line item 1, or number 1, line 5, auditor. So I had some question on the pagers and the number dispensers. Is there not another? I mean, it's only $500, but is there not another? Can we do that differently? I didn't even realize pagers are still around.
These are
Sorry,
restaurant
I'm trying
pagers.
to have some fun. Come on.
These are restaurant pagers. When we start serving hot dogs at the licensing line, they're going to be very helpful. No, seriously, what they are is to manage traffic. At busy times of the year, we actually have quite a few people milling around in the office, and licensing transactions can take quite a while, a long time, because nobody comes in anymore except for complicated matters. So this will allow us to give people a pager and tell them to go sit outside, and we'll page them when we're ready.
Okay.
And the barrier, before you ask, is I'm trying to keep either a barrier or 6 feet between all of the staff, and there are 2 staff members who sit closer than 6 feet to one another. So it is it's a barrier, a panel, in the same style as the panels, as the furniture we already have, with a clear glass window so that the person to the back can still see customers at the front counter.
All right, thank you, Marlene.
Welcome.
Council, thoughts on the three items requested by the auditor? Mr. Stevens?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay from Watson.
Okay, so does that mean that we accept, I'm sorry, let me ask a process question. As we go through each of these, do we want to go through everything and then vote on each one, or go through them, learn about them, and say we're okay or not okay?
Yeah, just okay or not okay.
Okay, so Mr. Stevens, are you okay with the first three requests?
For auditor, DCD, and courts?
No, I'm sorry, just for auditor.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure what you said, I was just confirming. My apologies.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Watson?
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Okay, thank you. The next item is number 2, line 9, DCD, front counter retrofit. I assume it's the same thing as the sneeze guard requirements. That I think that should be okay, or are you both okay with that?
I'm okay
I
with
don't know what it is. There was talk about using a common front, so.
Okay, Mr. Thomas, can you explain?
There still is. Well, I guess as far as the request goes, it's the large panel that you see to keep people from breathing on each other, and then there was some internal participation, partitions among staff in the office, depending on how many people comes back. There is an ongoing discussion about creating a single counter for intake for the county, and that's ongoing amongst the departments. So I don't have anything definitive on that, other than it's a discussion point, and it's kind of illustrative of the counter concept that you found in the campus plan. But there's more work to do to figure out how to make that happen.
Don't we have requirements once we get into a phase where our offices are open to have this in place by the state? I know they do for businesses.
Yeah, I can't speak to that, but it just makes sense.
All right, so Mr. Stevens.
So why is this retrofit so much more than the auditors basically doing the same thing?
I don't have the detail on it, Mr. Stevens. I mean, it would depend on what Greg and Erica had come up with as a solution.
Mr. Stevens, would you like us to find more information and come back to you?
No, I imagine that if Greg was in on it, it was okay. Just anyway.
I don't have details either, but I believe it is a larger area that they are covering. Mine was a panel between two people, and I agree that if Greg is working on this, they're not going to spend more money than they need to.
Right.
Okay,
so I'm fine.
All three are okay with the DCD request?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the next item is number 3, courts. It is on row 12. Technology upgrades to both Superior Court and the District Court. And again, per the number provided by the Auditor's Office, thank you, I rounded up to $98,000 and $91,000 respectively. Those are the two biggest items. Do you need information about this? Are you aware of what I think it was presented, as Mr. Thomas said, in a letter from the judge?
Yeah.
Judge Loring, are you on the phone?
I am. I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Do you mind either judge, just real quickly, and I thank you for the detailed information that you have given us, but I know we've asked you this before, but could you run through this really quickly for us?
Sure, and if Tony's on the line, he could talk in more specificity in terms of the technology changes needed. But in order for us to conduct jury trials with the required physical distancing, we're going to have to be able to do video live streaming both online and potentially into other physical spaces. And that's because with the required physical distancing, we think the max we can get in Superior Court is 20 people total. And that's going to be obviously foremost for potential jurors and or jurors. We'll be having a 14-person jury. And then that leaves room for very few members of the public. And so that's why it's critical that we're going to have to be live streaming video and audio. Right now, we're doing live stream audio through EV Capture. And so because of how outdated our technology is, we can't do that without significant changes. And that's where Tony could talk to you about what those specific changes are. But this is his recommendation, is to do this completely right now rather than try to do Band-Aids here or there that might achieve some of the necessary changes, but not all of them. And so this is Tony's recommendation. He's actually gotten the contractor to come through, or the vendor, I should say, come through and do a specific bid. And so this is to allow us to do full streaming, as well as to do other things that are going to be needed in terms of document management, exhibit management through the required technology to do it all electronically, not physical sharing of paper and other documents, to do the DocuSign between parties, to have all the required cameras for the right angles. This is a complete update to allow us to do what we need to do for jury trials, specifically on those first two items. And so we submitted a memo between Judge Jewett and myself on June 5th, where we explained the need for these technology changes. And then we submitted an additional memo last week on Thursday, on July 2nd, that provided the updated bid information, as well as on line 14, we also are asking about physical changes to the courtroom. And so I submitted a draft CAD drawing from Greg that he and I are still working to finalize. It's not final, but about the required physical changes to the courtroom to allow the necessary physical distancing, as well as to put up plexiglass in between required stations, etc. So that's his best estimate right now in terms of what that cost would be. And I can speak to the other line items if you want me to, but I'll stop there so you can follow up.
Mr. Watson, questions?
Many, but none at the moment.
Mr. Stevens?
I don't have any questions.
So, Judge, I have two questions for you. The first question is the rental for off-site facilities for jury selection. Is it not possible, and I must have missed this, I'm sure you discussed this before, but is it not possible through existing county space to have an off-site facility for jury selection? Or is it just nothing big enough?
Well, so this item is a placeholder, and we're not sure that we're going to need to do this, I'll have to say. So because it's going to take time, and it's going to take even more time now because we're having to do this later, to make the physical changes in the courtroom and the technology changes, it's very possible that we might need to rent facilities in the interim if we have to start jury trials. So this is part of this moving piece that we're not sure about. But to answer your specific question, no, we do not believe there are existing facilities. I mean, we need space to be able to hold 60 people with the required physical distancing. And so we're looking at, and we've gotten, quotes for Brickworks or the San Juan County Community Theater. But even if we use the fairgrounds, we're being told that we still have to pay for the cost of renting the big fairground inside building. And so we've put calls into people, and that's the information that we've received.
Okay, well, thank you. I was just, as you heard our earlier discussion, we're trying to make sure we can save anything we can. All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
so this might be a nit, but I'm not sure that $5,000 then would be reimbursable, since we don't even know whether we're going to spend it or not.
Well, so this is,
as compared to the capital equipment, right? I mean, that's.
but this is also a process question, I think, from our perspective as well. Some of, we can't purchase anything until we know whether we have funds to reimburse it. So that's number one. So even like for some of the PPE or other physical items, we have been hesitant to purchase anything because we don't know what funding is going to be available to reimburse it. But on that specific point, Mr. Watson, I agree that we don't know that we have that need, or certainly we don't have a receipt for it at this moment. Right. And so that could be something like the $5,000 that perhaps you would make as a secondary priority, and we would come back later on once we know whether or not we had that specific expense. Right. And I'll also say, I put this in my materials I submitted on Thursday. There now is some funding available through the State Administrative Office of the Courts, as well for courts, but that's only, and I just sent in a follow-up question today, that's only reimbursement, and I believe you actually have to have a signed contract if it hasn't already been spent. And so trying to understand from a process standpoint, I think there may be additional funds available, but my understanding at this point in time, based on the information I have, is that we would at least need to have the go-ahead from council to spend this money, and then there perhaps would be additional availability for additional reimbursement from the state. But I'm trying to understand that from a process perspective as well.
No, I understand. I appreciate that. And it's the old chicken and egg, which one do you put your bet on first?
Right.
Got it.
Bill, I look at this as that we've got this entire budget that was laid out in that spreadsheet with that general fund portion. And if it doesn't meet whatever qualification that's required for the reimbursement, it just comes out of the general fund. And maybe there's another expense that we can shift out with that.
I understand. I remember I started with this is a nit.
All right. Okay, so is there anything else? Mr. Stevens, do you have any questions for the judge or Mike?
No, thank you.
So at this point, are we comfortable with the allocation as presented and modified here?
I am, and in one of the WASAC lunch or whatever, one of their webinars, they had the presentation was from the courts and how other people are doing it. And so most of this, as much as it turns my stomach in some ways, but it is the way, the direction that they've got and how to deal with trials and uphold the law as far as access, etc. Needs to be done.
Okay, Mr. Watson?
I'm okay.
Okay, I am as well. And just with the caveat that, that we're not having individual departments order PPE or sanitation supplies that they work with either the health department or facilities to order this. I assume that's the process, correct? All right, thank you. The next item is Juvenile Court Services, row 20, number 4, laptops or docking station replace desktop computers for the option to work at home, and then the Adobe licenses. Mr. Watson?
I'm all right.
Ms. Stevens?
I'm fine. Does Tony have any comment?
I don't think he's on.
He's not on. Okay, that's fine. If he's not on, that's fine.
Linnea's on. I just want to point out that Juvenile Court Services, we're currently a staff team of 4.25, and we have 6 desktop computers. And so in some ways, I see this as an opportunity to save in the long run as well. And to also include that the 0.25 staff person, AOC provided the laptop for that position. So really we would be looking at reducing 6 computers to 4. So I just wanted to point that out as well. Thank you for your consideration and support.
And again, I would assume all of the technology is being purchased and acquired centrally through the IT department. Okay, so I'm fine with this as well. The next item is on line 24, row 24, number 5, ITIS, council hearing room tech upgrade for $4,000 instead of $80,000, and then the 100 webcams for $10,000. Mr. Stevens?
I'm fine.
Mr. Watson?
I'm fine.
Lots of enthusiasm here today. All right, so on number 27, row 27, number 6, Health Department, Annex front counter and Orcas front counter sneeze guard and barriers. Mr. Watson?
I'm fine with the caveat. We just need to reduce the number of counters.
Okay.
I thought everything was going online.
So, Bill, this is Mark. We still have clients coming in for WIC services and everything else, so I don't think we're going to be able to get rid of all of our counters.
How about we ask Mike and Greg in each department, as we're working for setting up these protection and front counter and other place sneeze guards and barriers, that we work as diligently as possible to limit where we need to put the work, but to keep our staff safe. Is that all right? Bill?
Yeah, I just don't, it kind of goes with my previous question. You know, we have 1,200 for the auditor, 3,000 and 6,000 for the front counter. I just don't know what we're doing there that's costing so much that it seems like it's going to be a lot different than what I've seen in the grocery store or other places.
So, Mr. Stevens, the health is the two different locations.
Two different locations, both Orcas and the annex, and our front office here is wide open right now. There is several things that need to get done, and so we are. It's a wide open building, wide open space, and so it's more elaborate than just putting up a simple sneeze guard.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was the different locations.
So it looks like it's about $3,000 per location as it follows suit with the front counter retrofit for DCD. All right, so the next item is 7, line 29 or row 29, facilities 64 hand sanitizer dispenser units for all county facilities. And then sanitizer and then a temporary custodian. I would assume that's to fill until they hire someone, Mike?
I think Greg's on the line, but no. So we've been providing or trying to provide extra cleaning activities. So that's why it's a temporary position. So it's not filling a position, it's additive to keep up with
the extra work.
With the extra work. Greg, do you have any comments on that? Okay.
Don't see. Oh, he's on the line.
I got to get unmuted. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
So we've hired a temporary person, and the temporary time is running out, and we need to make a decision. We're either going to release that position or we're going to turn that into a actual part-time, no longer temporary position.
Why is that?
James would be a better person to ask that, perhaps. I mean, those given my choices for how to, I don't have a actual position. I mean, I'm out of FTEs. So we hired a temp just temporarily with some CARES funding, and that's a 520-hour term limited position.
Thank you.
All right, so are we all okay with that? Mr. Watson?
I have a question, and
I believe. Hold on a second, please.
Thank you.
Am I on?
Yeah, right. There you go. Ms. Stevens?
Oh, I would be interested in what Mike says about a new part-time FTE.
Yeah, I was focused on temporary, so now I'm thinking about part-time. So, yeah, I've gone blank. I don't have a response to that. But I'm trying to figure out, I mean, one of the things that Greg is primarily trying to figure out is going forward in time, we have custodial, and then we've had to increase custodial. And so what is the new benchmark? And like everything in COVID-19, we're trying to figure out what's the duration. So
So, Mike, but wouldn't temporary be fine right now because we don't know if we're going to need this position if a vaccine comes or something changes?
Well, so we have to be careful with, so temporary, as Greg said, there's an hour limit, but what we could do, we can create a part-time term, what I call a term limited position, so we could give authorization to hire a part-time custodial person for 6 months or 9 months. And so we can bookmark the end of that, which would take us through this year into next. So that's probably what I would recommend.
All right. Mr. Stevens, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Mr. Watson?
Says my machine froze, rebooting.
Okay. Mylene, sorry to cut you off. Your thoughts, please?
Yeah, no problem. The $35,000 figure, Greg, where did that number come from? Was that the cost of the temporary position, which is about to end, or is that the cost of a continuing custodial position? Of course, the CARES funding will only pay for anything, costs incurred through October, but I'm trying to figure out what the $35,000 means.
That was a guess for a fractional FTE.
Moving forward, as opposed
Yes.
to what you've already spent. But the person you already have working is already being coded to COVID, correct?
Exactly. That's correct.
Okay, so really I would look at that $35,000 as an estimate, just to be clear that we don't have an exact calculation of what the need is, but if council approve the concept, which I certainly think is essential, to continue to provide extra sanitizing by this part-time or temporary person, I think it's a good position.
Great. Thank you, Mylene. Mr. Watson, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, my machine froze, so I had to reboot and reconnect it. And I'm comfortable with facilities request.
Okay. And Mr. Stevens, I don't recall if I asked you if you're okay with this.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Okay, great. So I just want to confirm that we are acknowledging or accepting $292,299, and that number is a little flexible because we rounded a little bit, and some of the expenses may not be exactly what was posted here. But as presented by Mike on the screen, I think he made changes as we went forward. Does council accept and support these requests? Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Great. So, Mike, do you need a motion or a vote on this, or is this discussion ample direction?
Whatever you feel comfortable with. If you could just do a motion, would be great.
I would entertain a motion at this point regarding the department request for a total of $292,299.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the department request for COVID-related expenses for $292,299. Any questions or comments? Without seeing any, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much to everyone on the phone. I apologize for this being confusing and laborious at this point, but I appreciate the work, and at least we check a box and we're moving forward to provide some safety measures and requirements that our departments need to move forward. Thank you very much. So it's 12:28. Do you want to keep going?
Before we move on, so my question is, does Tara Anderson have sufficient direction from council for her to process her grant reimbursement requests?
Yes, Bill, I believe that I do have the direction that I need as far as what has been approved by council, and I will move forward with generating the maximum reimbursements that we're able to across all grants.
Okay. So then the only other question that Mr. Stevens asked earlier was the 157.
Right, I'm not finished with that subject yet, because I wanted
Oh,
Mark
okay.
to go through some of his document. I just wanted to finish this section and then go to the 157. Is that all right?
Yeah, okay, sorry. I thought you were wrapping up.
No, I was just saying it's 12:30 and we have a few more items. Is it okay to go forward?
I'd like to wrap up CARES.
Jamie, is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Mark, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Would you mind, first of all, thank you for bringing the document forward to council regarding the requests from the various nonprofits in the community. Would you mind going through your document really quickly?
Sure. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. So I was able to get further clarification. Hopefully you guys can see the spreadsheet on your screen. I created a new tab that's called Delta Need for all the requests. And this pulls information from the resource centers, senior services, and the information that I received from the food banks. I only received information from the Orcas Food Bank at this point. This was in response to, I had sent out a form for them to fill out on their current need and projected 90-day need, and this is information I received back. Received further clarification from the senior services folks that the amount that they were requesting was on top of the amount, and I say I got to copy this and paste this, was on top of what we were already providing them through the Northwest Regional Council. So it was a clarification on that. I thought we'd be able to meet that need with the funding from Northwest Regional Council. However, I was informed by the senior services that the amount they're requesting was on top of the roughly 78,000 we were already providing or going to be providing them with grant funds for Northwest Regional Council. After completing this table and sending it out to you, we did receive notification that the Department of Commerce has additional grant funds through the CARES funding for rent eviction assistance, and the awards have not been officially made yet, but the draft amounts that are being discussed and proposed would have roughly 172,000 plus in rent eviction assistance that would be going to the Opportunity Council that then would be coming back to San Juan County. So that would be an additional 172K that is not within any of this. That would be for rent eviction assistance. Again, it would be not coming to us, it'd be going to the Opportunity Council to then come back into the community. Summing it all up, yeah, and I don't know if that would address this rent. The reason I mentioned that is you notice up in rent assistance, the Orcas Resource Center saying their current unmet need was almost $7,000 and their projected need was $90,000. They indicated that that was what they felt their needs were. I don't know if that additional rent eviction assistance would address that immediate need. We're still learning who's eligible and who's not and how it's going to work. So it's a brand new item that we'll have to talk with the Opportunity Council on what that means. But that may significantly reduce this unmet or projected unmet need from the Orcas Resource Center on rental assistance. I have talked with our staff and feel on the mental health needs that were identified from the 3 resource centers that we can redo our contracts and address those immediate needs without any additional funding there. So we are working through with the resource centers on their needs in regards to mental health issues. The household essential items for Lopez, this is really the Lopez Food Bank need. And so this is what the Lopez Community Resource Center has indicating, but it really is to address their version of the food bank. They don't have a separate organization for a food bank. So the Community Resource Center over there does work around food assistance and is what they're identifying as what their needs are. I also reduced what they had, what all the resource centers had as operation needs. I was was able to confirm with the Opportunity Council that the Opportunity Council was giving them an additional 10,000 on top of what the resource centers were reporting to me. So I reduced that amount accordingly for each of the resource centers. Senior services, this is because the senior nonprofit, they either own outright or in combination with the county, the three senior centers here in San Juan County. They operate them, and most of their operating revenue comes through room rentals and other aspects. And they are experiencing, obviously, the lack of room rentals and the ability to raise funds. They're also seeing an increase in the amount of Meals on Wheels being delivered, which can increase their transportation costs associated with that. That is in a partnership with us where they pay for all the fuel, maintenance, and upkeep on those vehicles, and any additional drivers that we onboard, they pay for the background checks and those type of things. And then they've also increased their staffing. And again, because of the lack of the ability to rent out their rooms, they've identified additional needs in the amounts that are there. And then again, the Orcas Food Bank has identified that they would have a shortfall in their operational needs of about $17,400 over the next 90 days. If you add all of that up, the current EdMed need was almost $40,000, and for the next 90 days is $336,000. That includes this rental assistance from Orcas, which I believe may be addressed with that new Commerce grant, but can't say 100% for sure. So happy to answer any questions that the council may have, and again, try to identify all funding sources and reduce and identify what the actual delta was as part of the exercise council asked me to do.
Great, thank you, Mark. Mr. Watson?
No comment.
Mr. Stevens?
I don't have any comment.
All right, thank you, Mark. I appreciate this work. Thank you very much. All right, so we have $157,000 that we have agreed in the past to allocate. I'd really like to figure out a spending path to get this into the community somehow. So a couple of the options that we have to work with, one is to partner up or work with the town of Friday Harbor. They have an application that's, we could modify that. The second option would be to work with the EDC, and they can put a program together following they've got a San Juan program they've been working on. Third, we could contact the chambers or the family resource centers to be a distribution point. How would you like to move forward on how we get the money out? And I'm more than willing to help with whatever group and staff to execute this, if that's helpful.
Well, my question is, we just had Mark put all this together and gather all this data, so are we just discounting this right off the bat?
No, what I was going to come to afterwards was that maybe we look at either allowing nonprofits and for-profit businesses to apply for the relief, or we segment $100,000 for the businesses and let's say $57,000 for the nonprofits. For these kind of nonprofits, sorry, not any nonprofit, but the ones that are mentioned here that provide services in the community. Just thoughts. And I don't really have a preference on how we move forward. I just would like to get the resources out to the community. So I'm more than willing to shepherd this through to get it completed. I just would like direction or thoughts.
Well, I did, the application that the town was using seemed pretty clean. And if we're going to push it out to some businesses, then I think we should use the EDC. But, right now there's a whole nother round of PPP money that's going to be available. Who's not muted?
I think that's Mylene. Sorry.
No.
So, we originally were talking about kicking it out to our small businesses, participating with the EDC, and I still like that plan. I think we've already, increased our contributions to the family resource centers and the, emergency rental assistance. And hopefully there'll be some additional Fed money coming or state money coming for those as this recession drags on. But I still like the original idea of trying to funnel some money into the businesses to help them, pivot or reopen or cover some of their reconfiguration upfront costs moving forward. And so I would be in favor of working with the EDC to roll this out and maybe look at ways of how to take the EDC plan and the town plan and make it a single kind of effort so that we're not being redundant. But I would push the 157 I would say out to county-wide kind of businesses or county-wide business. Other businesses outside of town, since the EDC's primary program right now is going to be San Juan Island focused.
Mr. Stevens?
A little bit jumbled. I kind of agree with Bill. If we're going to do it, I think that was the original intent. That's what we held back. That's what we agreed to, I thought. I know things are changing fast, but I think we ought to try to work with the EDC. I know both the town and Victoria's plans had been to, prioritize. I guess in the ranking or whatever, the priority would be people who haven't received anything.
Right.
So let me make sure I'm summarizing what I think you're both saying. So $157,000 to work with the EDC on some kind of a combined grant format that matches, it takes both the town and the EDC's document that goes out to and is available to anyone outside of the town of Friday Harbor. Does that sound good so far?
Yep.
Yep.
And if possible, is it all right if I work with Victoria to get a final document that I can email to Mike, who can email to you two for approval on what the wording means? If not, we'll have it on next week's agenda.
That's fine.
Yep. And the other point was, making sure the EDC understands that the county will, take care of the paperwork on the grant reimbursement effort, because that was one of their primary concerns.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll do that anyway. And if it's all right, again, once there's a final kind of what the request or the RFP will look like, I'll just work with Mike and Victoria to get whatever the granting language is to the EDC. Is that fine?
Yep.
Yeah, I want to keep track of this. So before we're sending out grants, I want to know who's getting them.
Yep. I agree with that too.
So that's the second question. So I'm just talking about getting the document out to the people. So when the RFPs return back, would we like council to be part of that selection process, or explain what you're asking?
I think we ought to let the EDC manage it, but we need to check up. So if you want to get the language together and bring it back next week, that's fine. Then if they put it out there and figure out the awards, but I'd like to at least know, like I want to see what the RFP is, and then I'd want to know who's getting the awards.
No, fair enough. That's what I was trying to convey, and I apologize if I didn't convey that correctly. I want to get this out into the public, so
yep.
I want to make sure that we're following the right process and that we get that done. So, Mike, do you need a vote on this?
Yeah, just do a motion.
I'd entertain a motion this time to, would you like me to state it, or do you guys have something?
No, go ahead.
So I would entertain a motion to allocate the $157,000 of CARES funding to the EDC for an RFP process out to local businesses outside of the town of Friday Harbor. We will bring back to council next week an RFP and then move forward with a report to council on the allocations.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the allocation of $157,000 to be executed through the EDC for grants for small businesses outside of the town of Friday Harbor. We'll come back to council with the RFP document for approval and then a summary of the allocation of the funding. Any questions?
Rick, this is Tara. I would just ask that we make sure that it's very clear if the county's grants administrator, that's Libby Concord taking that role, that they work very closely with her to ensure that they administer the program in a way that allows us to get that reimbursement.
Yeah, of course. I may not put that in the motion, but yes, of course. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much. Is there any other comments or discussion at this point regarding the CARES spending?
No.
All right, so our next item is council member updates, county manager updates, and we have one planning commission appointment. Mr. Stevens, do you have any updates?
I had one. There was an opportunity, and I want to, I don't know, you know, Tara is still there, is to thank her very much for her help. The federal government had they have money at the end of the year, and if there's any money left over, if you have a project application in for a grant, sometimes it goes through very quickly. And we are at that point in their fiscal year. And so we put together a grant for Agate Beach Park on some of the things that have been suggested when we redo the road, which would include a new ADA toilet, fencing, signage, trail materials, as well as some other signage. So I put it together and got it in. It's kind of a throwing pasta against the wall, but it's for $97,000, so it doesn't have to go back to Washington, D.C. It becomes a local decision whether to move it along, and then when they find out if there's any money left over, they start handing out the dollars. So I just wanted to update you on that and let you know what happened. I did give Mike a copy of all the documents, and Tara has them also.
Great, thank you.
That is my biggest update.
Anything from WASAC or?
Oh, there's a lot going on WASAC, but mainly they're trying to get, they're pressing the state to release the $300 million or whatever they're still sitting on for local government. So we're trying to get a lot of information to them on how we've spent it and why we need more money, which our discussion with Tara earlier is an excellent, I think I'd like to send her spreadsheets to them so they know how we're spending it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, to that point, WASAC sent out, I think it was last week or the week before, a really short survey of counties to ask them how they've used the CARES money. But it would be good to send Eric Johnson that information because everyone's kind of in the same boat. The money wasn't sufficient enough.
All right, anything else, Mr. Stevens?
Nope, that's it.
Mr. Watson?
No real big update. Colin, highlighted my visual effects on opening up the road.
Where was the leather jacket?
No, that was a Public Works hazard vest. So therefore, people would see me as a hazard in the road.
Funny.
Anyways, no other update.
All right, thank you. Real quick, as everyone's heard, The ferry discussion last week, I was very disappointed in. I don't know if anyone tuned in from here, but the situation for ferries continues to be bleak, and there didn't seem to be much direction or vision on how to get out of this. There was obviously many funding issues, but crews not available to come to work and boats sitting idle, not to mention the Coast Guard requirements. So we will continue to see in the near future a modified, reduced winter schedule that's going to be running late because the schedules weren't designed for the turnaround times and the amount of cars that we're seeing on this schedule run. So, Mr. Stevens, one thing that would be really interesting, and I passed this along to Joe Timmons, I think, on Friday. The governor's got the mandatory furlough time, which doesn't directly impact the crews and the ticket folks, but if you need to make a decision from the management team at ferries, they're furloughed. It's kind of the same thing like when we applied for the state application for the move into phase 3, the people making the decision were furloughed. My request would be, if possible, on all ferry employees, if they could have a modified furlough schedule that wasn't in the middle of summer, because a lot of decisions aren't being able to be made because there's no one to make them because they're on mandatory furloughs. So I've passed it to Joe, and if you have, either one of you have any channels to talk to the governor, it'd be really great for certain key things that affect our transportation and health out here. That would be helpful, if you can.
Well, that furlough is affecting everybody, just like you said. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and the health department's on a furlough. So,
well, I guess my request to Joe was like, can you guys look at some stuff that are essential and maybe, I mean, I jokingly said it's okay to furlough ecology, but can we keep the ferries going? He didn't laugh very much, but I tried. And then finally, the state program, the transportation committee that's starting to get formed up to talk about the future of transportation is in a couple weeks. That's all I have. Mike, do you have something?
So have they decided on a fall legislative session yet?
Yesterday, the governors, the idea of a August or September legislative session is getting less and less likely. The governor, between the furloughs and everything else they've cut and the robust reserves, they feel like they can make it through the end of the year without a special session.
All right, I don't have anything else, Mr. Thomas, do you?
Yeah, I think the 40-some thousand state employees taking a furlough day a week, I think through July, and then they are furlough day a month for some period of time. So yeah, it's impacting a lot of stuff. Obviously for me, a lot of budget discussions with staff and departments, getting ready for next week's conversation with council, radio project. Super happy to see the connector road open up. So that's kind of the main focus is the budget right now.
All righty, anything else?
I have an appointment.
No, I'm working on that, Bill. Any other close?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, and we will not have a closed session. So we have a appointment for advisory committee appointment for Planning Commission, David Kane. Mr. Watson.
Yep, I move we appoint David Kane as a San Juan Island representative to the Planning Commission.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve David Kane for the San Juan Island Planning Commission. Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair, I just learned today that, I have yet another San Juan Island open position. So I'm working with Ingrid to track that down, and then I'll be working on a recommendation for an appointee on that too.
Who's going on?
Well, that's what caught me off guard. I mean, I know Victoria Compton left the Planning Commission, and so that's the one I thought I was replacing, but according to the current staffing chart, there's 2 open seats. So we're trying to track that down and confirm and verify. And if there is, then I'll be coming forward again.
Oh, okay.
And there are 2 Orcas openings as well. I asked one of the people who applied to as a new application to reach out to either one of you. Have you had a chance to speak with the gentleman from Orcas?
I haven't.
Not recently, no.
All right, so I will. I'll try to make sure that Ingrid forwards the application to both of you.
Yes, please.
And
Thank
I'd
you.
like to make that appointment fairly soon if possible. So, all right, is there anything else for today? The closed session is no longer needed. We will be removing from our agenda a closed session to discuss matters pertaining to collective bargaining pursuant to RCW 42.30.144D. Anything else?
Nope.
All right, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the work on the CARES funding and everything else today. So thank you very much. It's 12:55. San Juan County Council's July 7th meeting is adjourned. Thank you.